Hi, Pat.
Hello, hi there. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you for joining. The honor is all mine. How are you
Ah,
doing?
doing well, thank you. And you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Over
Good.
the last week, I've been like struggling to sleep, like insomnia. I'm not sure what's going on. And it's not like, it's overthinking. It's more
Hmm.
like I just don't want to sleep, you know? So it's like self-inflicted. And then I get up in the morning, I still manage to get, about 8 hours sleep at least.
Hmm.
And then I get up, then it's like, okay, the day starts back to normal, podcasting later, all cool. I'm surprised how I just, show up, and I still got the energy flowing, yet, the insomnia straight after this, I'll browse through the show, make sure it was all good. And then after that, I'll be like, okay, I'll read, but then I'll get bored of reading after a while. And I'll be like,
Hmm.
just chill and see, what time I sleep. And really does it happen? I don't know.
Yeah.
Have you ever suffered with insomnia before?
Yeah, yes, actually, right now. I have the same problem. I used to be a wonderful sleeper, so I can relate.
Yeah,
But I don't know whether it's getting older or whatever. But if I could get 6 hours sleep, it's a luxury. So I can
yeah.
totally relate. So I listen to podcasts in the middle of the night because if I
Okay.
can't fall asleep, I could at least relax and listen to something. But I
Yeah.
totally know what you mean. It's horrible at times and there's not
Okay.
much you can do other
Yeah.
than just say, all right, I'll try to deal with it. I get a little tired during the day, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the
And
territory.
yeah. Depending what the tasks are. But I mean, if you find yourself surrounded by at least like, good people or good conversations, like, we've just started off having, then you find it to be okay, the energy levels
Yes.
like sort of you feel like
Oh,
less tired.
yes,
Yeah,
I
I guess
agree.
it's yeah. For me, I first thought, okay, maybe it's because of lifestyle change. So keep in mind now it's 7 p.m. in South Africa.
Ah,
You
mm-hmm,
coming to us from Florida, which is cool. And so when the schedule changed, I thought, okay,
mm-hmm,
maybe
mm-hmm.
it's that. But then I realized, okay, it's not that. Now, I've gotten used to it and I accommodate it. So I'm not sure what it is. I mean, it'll be unhealthy if one can't sleep at night because they
Mm-hmm.
overthinking and they stress. But it's not even that.
It's not that. It's just that you can't. You just want to enjoy being awake. And I can relate to that. There's just so much to do, and even in the middle of the night to think about or whatever, or to just enjoy. I don't want to sleep as much.
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe also it's subconsciously as well. I'm just, putting it out there, all options on the table. Maybe because, I've been interacting with people, especially from the States and Canada for so long now, that after the podcast, you're like
Hmm.
probably like in their time zone now, and you're wondering,
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
happening on that end of the world. Who knows? Who knows? Anyway, Pat, thank you so
Hmm.
much for coming on. You got such a cool name, you know, Pat Black-Gold. Am I saying it
Oh,
correct?
yes, yes,
Is it
Black
Pat
Gould. Yeah,
Black-Gold?
Gould.
Yeah, it's such a cool name.
It's a hyphenated name. It's interesting. There's a little story if you want to hear it. When I got married and added the Gould on, and you have to change all your records and all your information, your credit cards and everything. And so I spoke to somebody on the phone about the change. It might have been the card or the bank or something. And I said Black hyphen Gould. Black hyphen Gould. And the woman said, how do you spell hyphen? So, so it's black dash Gould. So I say,
Well, I guess she was just making sure, it's not really a hyphen.
mhm, yeah,
Saying
yeah.
dash, can be the simpler way of, saying it. Okay, cool. Thanks for that history on it. But that you are an author, you're a speaker, you're a
Mhm.
clinical psychologist. You are the perfect guest for me on a Tuesday. And I'm actually going to ask Mickey to invite you for the podcast on a Tuesday, which is called
Uh-huh.
Talking Back to Suicide. My
Mhm.
co host, lady, she's based in Oregon. She's a retired child psychologist.
Ah.
And she was actually one of my first guests that I ever had on the show. And then after a week, we were so like on the same page when it came to mental illness and PTSD. I know you've also worked with the troops as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we should get a podcast
Yes.
going, and focus on the topic. And it's been, about, 6, 7 months now in, and we're flowing now, we're really flowing. I mean, we got guests lined up, all the way till September. And I mean, it's a serious topic, it's a
Yes.
pandemic. And, we focused on it highly, especially on a Tuesday, and just getting more awareness out there, towards mental illness and, preventing suicide. So I'll send Mickey a request, and I would love for you to join us on that show,
Thank you. I would love to. Thank you.
to get your wisdom and expertise on the matter, that can help, the listeners, or let them pass it on to people they know are
Yes.
suffering with mental illness. There's just not enough awareness around the topic at all.
That's true. It's very true. And in all different communities and all different age groups where it came from and how it originated, just everything. I agree. I agree. And I believe we're still in June, and June is PTSD Awareness Month.
Okay,
So
thanks for telling me
yes,
that.
yes.
Yeah, I'll actually bring it up tomorrow on the show, and I'll mention exactly
Ah,
who I got it
mm-hmm,
from. Yeah, thank you, thank you.
mm-hmm.
So, Pat, let's start off with, a bit about your history, how it all started for you. Was becoming an author first in mind? Was becoming a clinical psychologist first in mind? How did it all start for you?
Oh boy. It started actually back. I lived in the New York, New Jersey area, and my major in college was theater, so I was in the theater world. That's what my interests were, in acting and also in directing. And I also was a professional mime, which my son cringes every time I happen to mention that. But I was interested in the idea of movement, and not quite dance, but
Yeah,
movement and telling stories silently without the use of words. And I did that for a number of years. I was in the New York area, and then I moved up to Maine to do summer stock theater, and ended up staying in Maine, and ran a murder mystery dinner theater company where I was a producer and was a playwright for that as
okay.
well. So I did that for many, many years. And theater world, oh, it's not that easy to make a living in the theater world. So I wanted something, but I wanted to find something that is sort of like incorporates the human nature, the way what makes people tick. What is it? What
Yeah,
kind of career is going to move me in that direction? So I found psychology, and
yeah,
decided that I wanted to major in that, and moved into that world quite a bit, and worked with various different groups of people as well. I had an interest from mime and creative movement. I developed an interest in working with deaf individuals, because deaf speaking in ASL is such a beautiful, beautiful language. And so I worked in with the deaf community for a while, even though my signing was so-so. They accepted me, and it was just beautiful to work with them. And eventually I moved into working with the Veterans Administration, and working mostly with vets, sort of like within my era, Vietnam vets. And I had a special place in my heart for them because I grew up at that time, and I also had a cousin who was in Vietnam. And
yeah,
so that's really where my focus was, what they went through, what their lives were like, both the difficulties they had when coming home, and their struggles. And that's what led me then at some point to saying I need the creative side to come back. and
yeah,
and and I was going through semi-retirement at that time, moved down south, and said, all right, what can I do? And it was just, I didn't feel like the theater. I wanted to go into the back to theater again, but I found my way of writing through short stories, and then eventually through my books that just sort of brought back in the what makes people tick, and especially what makes people tick when they've gone through hard times, and how to be
yeah,
resilient. The PTSD you talked about, that we've been talking
yeah,
about, that's so difficult to do, but you can work as best as you can to try to live with it.
yeah. That's it. How can we live with it? I mean, we mentioned the minor topic of insomnia, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not a healthy insomnia, as I said, because it's not stress related, it's not overthinking, it's not uh, aggravated anxiety. So I can only imagine, like with PTSD, how difficult it must be, you know, to live with it. You know, I don't even want to imagine, because we all have our moments, but it can be so minor that we just like, okay, whatever, tomorrow's a new day, we'll just move on with life. We'll be better tomorrow. But with the veterans and what they've witnessed, what they've seen, what they've experienced, I mean, I wouldn't be able to join any army force because I know, if I do make it back, I'm not going to be able to live with that. So, like, I mean, just out of curiosity, like, what methods, have you used, that has been beneficial, to all the veterans that have suffered with PTSD?
It is difficult. It is something that's difficult to treat. And when you're talking about Vietnam War veterans, they came back. We didn't have a diagnosis back then. We were still calling it the old things of shell shock, or there's something the matter with you, you're crazy, there's something wrong with you. And it was because of the Vietnam vets and their returning home that we were actually able to get to the point of seeing what these symptoms were like and being able to diagnose it. And it wasn't until the early 80s, that we gave the diagnosis of PTSD because we found the clinical symptoms that had an impact on everyone. And it's understandable that if you've suffered trauma and you're very hypervigilant and you're watching everything because it would mean that if I don't do that, if I'm not keeping an eye on something, it could cost me my life. So we
Yeah.
try to work in a way that brings it back to, where are the places you're feeling safe? Are you here? Is this room safe for you? Can you relax, bring that anxiety down a little bit in a place that you know is more safe? And it's hard. You're trying to lessen that level of the hypervigilance, but it always is still there. Or you try to make it to the point where I know I have this and I'm doing my best to work with this and be careful with it. And a lot of times too, people with families, because they're hyper vigilant and they train their families to be as hyper vigilant and aware of everything as they are. Be careful where you're going here. I don't want you going here. I don't want you to go into a place like that. And that's just the love of a parent wanting to protect a child. So
Yeah.
also educating families about what the symptoms are, and also educating the patients, the clients, so they understand these symptoms are a normal response to stressors. You are not crazy. These are normal responses to stressors. So let them know that. And I think that's important for them to realize too.
Yeah, you made such a good point there. I didn't even think of that. Like it was the Vietnam War was such a long time ago. You didn't have the expertise and technologies that you have today.
Yeah.
You know, like it makes me think. Of when you come from that generation. I laugh about this because I think of my mother. I may be going through something. That was labeled in my time. It's a modern
Mhm.
label, and then she'll be like, "Oh no, just get over it." Because in her days, that's what they had to do. Just get over
That's
it.
what
If you're
they were
feeling this
told
way,
to do.
just get over it. But in this day and age, it's not that simple to, just get over it, especially when we see the newer generations, your Gen Zs, they're not able to like manage, the reality of the world, this digital area that just keeps them in this cage for so long that the moment they're out of that cage, they can't handle that pressure. It leads to mental illness, leads to suicide, anxiety, depression. So very different
Mhm.
time. Yeah, very good point. Very good point. But I mean, if we look at back then versus 2025, would you say we progressed a lot in dealing with the matter with the veterans, or
I think that we have, in the sense that there are a lot now that we've accepted the fact that it exists. I think that had to be the first thing, because
right?
veterans would it was a stigma to have anything, because you're told to be strong, and gosh forbid you tell somebody you're not feeling good. You in the military, who's going to cover you? What's going to happen? So you couldn't. Well, even now, it's even hard for veterans to talk about it, or people in the military to talk about it. But there's the stigma to a large degree, I think, is not there as much anymore. So there are treatments that veterans receive, and there's a wide variety of clinical treatments that veterans go to programs for individual therapy, group therapy, various different types of therapy that they can have that are shown to be effective with veterans. And one of the biggest to me, and this was always the way that I would like to work, because veterans, and we all do, if anyone's dealing with mental illness, we think, what's the matter with me? I'm the only one that's dealing with this. I can't tell anyone I have this. But when you go in a group, and if you get to the point where you could build a trust to know that I'm having difficulty sleeping at night, or I hear firecrackers going off. It's 4th of July. I can't stand 4th of July. And they go, you've got that too? You mean you got that? I've got that. You've got that? And they start knowing they are not alone, and they're connecting with each other. That builds a bond for them that they can relate and know, okay, I'm not alone in this. That's
Yeah,
really important.
yeah. And what you said, earlier about, psychology and what makes people tick. I think in 2025, we're all still asking that questions. That's the world we live in, especially if you're working for a marketing agency. You have your own marketing agency. We're always trying to figure out what makes people tick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not like a professional psychologist. Never studied, the subject, but I got a few textbooks, that I got from, secondhand educational stores. It's these old school textbooks. You can always go online these days, but I wanted these old school textbooks, just to get like a foundation on the subject, because I'm also curious about what makes people, do this, what makes people do that, what causes this, even down to like what makes a serial killer, because there has to be
Mm-hmm.
like some psychological component to that as well. And from what I've seen, it goes way back, to their childhood, something may have happened there. And then I start asking a question, okay, if we catch, let's just say, the police or whoever catches a serial killer, is there like, do we just take them and, lock them away for whenever? Or do we actually, do research to actually see, okay, what can we do to actually, find out why he or she was actually doing ABC and fix that with a person? Not saying it's necessarily the right thing to do, especially when you have the victim's family. You're going to be like, no, why are we doing that? But it can, I don't know, for me, help us prepare, work on these topics more, in society instead of just ignoring it and being ignorant that it exists. I
And
think
and
so.
there are studies that have been done with serial killers as well that really have psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists talking to them to try to understand the roots of the behaviors and seeing um, where these things stemmed. Very hard recidivism. It's very easy to repeat that history. It's very hard to stop um, individuals that do that, and it is very scary to see can they get past that, and can they be free again. It's really difficult. I used to work on a forensic inpatient unit, and in forensic psychology, and trying to see, is there any rehab that can be done. It's difficult. It's very difficult.
I
And you
can,
will see people saying we really can't have that risk of happening. Minor offenses, maybe some other things, or is there some rehabilitation? But there's such a high rate of anything returning and happening again.
yeah,
It's difficult, but it is being studied, and then there are psychologists and psychiatrists who work within that field to try to understand and grasp the behaviors. Maybe that's necessarily easy to change the behaviors, though. Yeah,
yeah, depending how far in it actually is as well.
exactly,
I mean,
exactly.
nobody is born a serial killer. Nobody is born to hate. Nobody is born
Yes.
to judge. That came afterwards. So
Yeah.
getting to the root, of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
what a world. The whole world is driven by psychology. We really think about it. It's all
Mhm.
driven by psychology. if you can master, the predictions of, a generation, you know, that's it. You've mastered like a huge, huge key there, to the world and how we
Yeah.
work. Well done, programmed. So based on what you've told me so far, is this what, sorry, led to the book, all the
Yeah.
angel, all the broken
Oh,
angels,
the
yeah.
Broken Angels. It did a mixture of things led to the book. Definitely the fact that I had a cousin who went to Vietnam and I worked with Vietnam vets, but I also wanted to honor that time period in history, the 50s, the 60s, and 70s. It was my generation. And I wanted to get to sort of honor what my family life was like back then and how we moved from the sort of reserved, refined 1950s. It's sort of like watching the world on black and white TV back then. Everything was just, the TV was just all black and white back then. Okay. And then the 60s explodes into color, dynamic colors all over the place, liberating, freeing society to some degree, but also very frightening and turbulent because we have the war. So, because I love to see how people tick, I put the characters there, and it's semi-autobiographical. So what is it that we see as people make these changes through time? We watch a family progress from the 50s to 60s to the 70s, and we see how I thought the best way to do it was to have one character whose belief system stuck sort of family and wanting to serve the military, which is noble. It was just that it was the Vietnam War they were serving, and the cousin being more of the pacifist and not liking the war, having no problem with the military, but it just happens to be this war. So what if they were taking different paths, and he felt one way and she felt the other way, and the way their stances were, he wanted to serve, she was afraid for him serving and protested the war. Their relationship was a metaphor of the divide that was going on in the country at that time. So I tried to play it through a family dynamic and what happens when we're divided like that, and how can we get back together even through a
Yeah.
difficult divide, because one believes they're true, the other believes they've got the truth, and now we're trying to, their family. Can we break through that? So all of that played into the context of this. And then, of course, the whole idea of veterans and veterans coming home from war and what they faced and the difficulties they had back then, as opposed to not being the heroes. The World War II guys were heroes. You came home and you were a hero. So the father
Yeah.
figures in the family, the older generations born during the Depression, came home as heroes. And now all of a sudden, our veterans aren't respected for that. And all they want is to be treated okay. So all of this
Yeah.
plays out in the book. All of that plays out in the book.
Wow. Now, how many
I
pages is the book?
Oh, it's about 370 or 80 or so. I didn't know it
Yeah.
was going to be that long.
Well,
But
I
I
mean,
needed to bring the
besides,
story through to I needed to bring the story to a point, and it just sort of
yeah,
went that
yeah,
way. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, besides it being like an historical fiction, in the 90s, 1950s, it's also an educational story. You know,
Yes.
whoever reads it, will also learn from it.
Oh
And
yeah.
I'm not sure, you can advise, whether you would recommend this book to families of veterans, to read. Because as
Oh
you
yeah.
mentioned, so you got your characters, Kate and Albie,
Yes.
and they're going through this family dynamic, confusion, and one this way and one that way. And I'm sure that's exactly what happens even today.
Yes, exactly, exactly. It could really be related to looking at the divides in the country, and what is most important for us at that time, and how do we do that? Because we see the family trying to navigate what's going on in the world and keep a family together with a lot of struggles and through the divisions that go on. how do we navigate that? And it's also another part of it is too, it's about the women, what women have gone through at that period in their lives, and continue to go through as they're emerging. We saw some freedom happening with women's movement at that time period. And what is it like to have very specific jobs as a woman? Albie knew he had a role. He knew what he wanted to do with his life, but Kate was limited, and she came from a blue collar family that says women don't go to college because you only go to college to marry a guy and then become a housewife. So why spend the money? So
Yeah.
limited career opportunities were there for women back then. So she wanted something different. She didn't know what it was. She wanted something different. So she had to fight her way through this a society where changes are happening and finding her voice and who she was as a woman at that time. So it explores also that dynamic, and that's also great for people of all ages right now. What is it like? It's a different time, but there are some similarities, and we're still struggling and dealing with a lot of the same issues. And all generations have told me that they enjoy it, even younger generations. They love the historical perspective too. We went through a draft. We actually had a draft lottery. There was such a thing as a draft lottery where on television your number could be picked, and that's going to dictate whether you are going to Vietnam or not. And young audiences love to hear just that this happened, and that really dictated what happened to men's lives at that time. So all of the historical components that my co-author and I wrote about there, everything is real. That we were very careful to make sure that there was not one detail that was not accurate in terms of the historical perspectives on everything, even down to the weather at certain days during a peace march. We were very
Yeah.
conscious
Yeah.
of that.
Wow. Thank you for the
Yeah.
history lesson. Like, I mean, I've seen on movies or you watch, certain shows where you saw, how that lottery, happened, those days. But to actually hear it from someone who lived through it, that's a different type of experience for me right now. I mean,
Hmm.
I can understand and I can agree why all types of ages and generations will, enjoy this book because based just on what you have told me, over the last few minutes, I can see the world is exactly the same. Maybe there's been some changes, with technology, infrastructure, financial system, but psychologically, aren't we like sort of living through the same thing? When you spoke about women, aren't there women still out there in the world who are still fighting for an education? You know,
Hmm. Yeah.
I come to think about it. So there's three podcasts that I host. There's a third one, which is the final one, which was launched, late last year with a colleague of mine from Canada, and it's called Creating Team Human. And about 3 weeks ago, we had guests, young females, young students from Afghanistan. They were on the show. So they get funded internationally in order to have an education. And they came onto the show and they told us about, how they are doing stuff illegally and how they are fighting. And they're literally fighting just to get an education. And they're getting a successful education. So since the Taliban took over and so on, ladies or
Yeah.
whether grown or not, doesn't matter. As you said, your priority is to stay at home. You got all these government officials that are marrying these girls at an extremely young age, and that's how it's going to be. But they are saying, no, that's not how it's going to be. And now with international support and podcasts, giving them a voice, they gain traction or they get funded, they can have an online education. So it still happens,
It still happens.
point of that,
Exactly.
it still happens. So we're still living through that. So your book, your content, your mandate, your work, your legacy will still be fighting those societal issues. I mean, it's crazy, when you think about it and you talk about it, you just ask yourself, when will chaos in the world actually stop?
Would
You
be
know?
nice, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Where it could just be equality wherever you go, no one's fighting with each other and no one's bombing each other. And if you want an education, you can go get an education.
Yeah.
You know,
And
would be
and
nice.
can we learn the lessons from history?
Yeah.
Because all different eras present lessons through history. And I did not study history when I was young. I was horrible in school. I was really, really bad. And history never interested me. The only reason history interested me was in high school was there was a cute boy in class, and I kept going because I wanted to sit by him. But I didn't until I started writing, there was not that interest in history. And it was only recently, and I thought I've wasted so many years not learning. And we know
Yeah,
history does repeat itself. So, what is it that could make us actually listen to history, listen to these, read these books, watch the TV shows that presents history, and know that there are lessons. Every generation offers lessons through them. Can't we take
yeah,
advantage of those? They're there for us
yeah,
to see what those fights were and how we continue to fight and how we could advance things and take off from where what's already been created if we can keep building from that if we know it but we get rid of it. We just choose to get rid of
yeah,
it, you know,
yeah.
not
We
studying
go on
it.
emotion, we go on
Yes,
emotion,
yes,
the world is still divided. There's so many different opinions, from political to religious, and we just remain so
yeah,
divided instead of, as you said, learning from history. What happened? Do I even know my own history? Do I know my own
yeah,
country's history? Do I know my own family's history? Should I look into it? Is history repeating itself? And I can't even answer that question because I haven't looked back. What
yes,
happened in the 90s? What happened in the 80s? So before
hmm,
I give an opinion in 2025, let me look back, you know, let me look at the facts, and what
yeah.
can we take away from it. But it's so good, that individuals such as yourself, we all out there and we all just pushing that message in one way or the other, for
And
people
one of the things that you mentioned something important too was like even knowing our own histories. I grew up with my grandmother. We had a three-generation house, so my grandmother, my parents, and myself and my brother. And I was writing about her because she's part of the story, or part of the story too. And I realized I never asked the questions I could have asked to find out. She came over here on her own at the age of 16 on the Carpathia, was the ship that later rescued the Titanic. But what that experience, that's all I know. That's the only thing that I know. And I know a few things about her from Czechoslovakia, but I didn't ask the questions. Why don't we, while our people are alive, can we ask these questions? Can we make sure from our older generations to grab their stories? And
yeah,
they're so important.
if they want to talk about it, that's the other thing,
Yeah,
everyone is
if
like,
they're willing to talk about it.
yeah,
Yeah,
keep the past in the past, and some situations, when you question, it's like if someone tells me something and they're much older than me, like I respect what you got to tell me, but then I'll ask you why, and maybe there's something you don't want to tell me as well, so now I'm going to get like
very
a
true.
half truth out of it as well, you know
Hmm.
and with misinformation flying around, like flies just all over the show, you have to be so sure on your resources if you're going online, to actually, um, find out for yourself because you're not getting it, with people down here. So
So true
that,
nowadays, and that's tough. That's so you have to find the real history enough to locate it from where are your sources, where are your trusted sources. Very
yeah,
and very difficult. And the younger the generations have, they're all over the place on social media. How do they navigate that? You know, I don't know. It would be hard. Where do you really look for that?
yeah. And I mean, the other sad thing is the newer generation, they're not even looking. They don't even
They don't
care,
even look.
you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
So, yeah, I can't even say, what's next or, what's to come, we just have to do like our best. But I mean, thank you for like what you're doing, with your book, and so you brought in a co-author as well on the book.
So I'm sorry. Repeat that again.
So you brought in a co-author on the book,
I brought in.
a co-author. So there's a
Oh,
co-author.
co-author. Oh, yes, 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 yes. I had a lot of the story in my mind, and it was my story. And but there was a point of it where I met with him. We were in a writing group together, and I met with him, and through one meeting alone, I realized there was a whole component of the story I was not including. So we started talking, and I said, wait a minute, I think that we've got a connection here. And he amazingly had to come into my world, and which he did not live in. He didn't from my neighborhood, my state, whatever, and a slightly different generation, younger.
Yeah.
But we found a way to merge our voices and our stories. And my writing groups would even say, this is going to be tough because you have a voice, Pat, and Steve has
Yeah.
another voice. Somehow we merge them. We found a way to merge them so that we can't even tell sometimes, did you write that part? Did I write? Who did what to that? We don't even know at times. And he's a brilliant researcher too. So he was really great at being able to track some of the little details historically for their accuracy, which was really good. And we just sort of bounced off each other. Because there's a lot of also humor in the book, and he's great at that. So we just played off of each other quite a bit, and we made it somehow connect. He just joined the story, and it was a fascinating just collaboration, something I never did before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine,
Yeah.
being okay. Like, I mean, I've had a lot of like single authors, on the show where it's solo. I had once, they were also co-authors and they came on, together. And I can, for what I picked up, to get that relationship that syncs, where it's back and forth, can be difficult,
Hmm.
especially with, I mean, not everybody writes the same, it'll
Yeah.
be a different, output, whatever, one chapter or even a sentence, the ending will be quite different. So that creative process, I'm glad at least you found someone, especially with an historical fiction where it's in
Mm.
sync and there's not too many disputes. I'm sure there is disputes, here and there, but
Oh yeah.
it's not to like a point where, okay, you go your way, I'm going my way, you write your book and I'm gonna write my book. And let's see who tells the most.
Hmm.
It's extremely difficult, and the amount of authors that I have had on, I can tell, by listening to them, it won't be easy for them. I mean, they have issues with their publishers or the editors already. So, I mean, that's already, another phase to go through. So when it comes to like the editing and publishing, like are you and Steve independent or are you working through a publisher as well?
Oh, together, everything, yeah, everything we did was together, was united, and all of that. We were able to really find a way to work together through the editing and through the public. And we self-published ourselves, so
Okay,
it's our piece. We worked with an editor
nice.
together on that to tighten that. We worked with the cover designer together, and conceptually trying to come up with just the right match of what we were looking for. So it was a tight process in all of
Yeah,
that. Yeah. And what you were
yeah,
saying about co-authors too is interesting. It's not like we both came up with an idea for a book that's based on a story we're doing together. It's even harder because he was joining in a story that was already their history, so that's
yeah,
even harder to move into somebody else's world. There's co-authors that come in and they say, let's create and let's just brainstorm and do from scratch. So there's so many different types of co-authors,
yeah,
processes
yeah,
together. So, and ours was just one where he just came into my history. Welcome
yeah,
to my world. And then he had to be there, and he did. So it really is different depending on how you approach something, whether it's a fresh new project or you're approaching something that's got a background already. So that's a whole other component of it.
yeah. So, like, I mean, with anything, before you start working on a creative project, with a completely new person, on a project, especially that you've already started, they need to fit your goals and your mandate. That is so important.
Hmm.
There may be benefits that they're coming with. Maybe they've already got, experience. They've already published a book. They've been in the game for longer than I have been in the game. They can come with that expertise. They got, a network already. They've got an audience already, which is what most people, are looking for these days. Do you already have an audience? You
Hmm.
know, living in this digital era. So I mean, you have to make that decision, for yourself, for independent creative authors out there who are listening to the show. I mean, you got to make that decision for yourself based on principles and values, not on what the other person can do
Yeah,
for me. Will they fit,
yeah,
what I got going on here? Because if they don't fit, but they still have, all these added value extras, it's going to defeat why I even started this in the first place.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
It is difficult. I'm more of the social media type person. His presence was a little bit more in the background in that sense, but in terms of putting it all together, we were united. So he's not
Yeah.
much one for social media. Yeah, so I kind of cover the front front end of that, and he'll be working on other stuff there. So
I can relate to that as well. I mean, even myself, I'm an independent artist. We have our own independent label, but you are the face of the brand,
yeah, 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 right. So you know what? Yeah.
Yeah, you got to do all the talking. You got to do all the meetings. You got to, be on social media. We just going to be in the background. We're going to do the recording. We'll do the mixing. We'll do the mastering.
Yeah.
But you need to be there. You need to be there. When there's clients who have come because they're here to record with us, okay, you do all the talking. You just tell us what we need to do. I
And
get
they're
that.
both important roles. They're
I
both
get
important roles.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You realize that, look, which I'm glad that I learned early in my life, that we all have strengths and weaknesses. So
Hmm.
we connecting as in, look, we've all come together. I know the universe has brought us together for a reason because we're all passionate about writing, we're all passionate about music, we're all passionate about historical fiction in that era, in history. But okay, what's your strengths? What's your weaknesses? And then you put it all on
Yeah.
the table, you know,
Exactly.
and then it'll be like, okay, you do this because you're good at this, you're more sociable than us. Okay, so you'll
Hmm.
do that. Not saying that you're not involved in the production or the writing, but when it comes to that, you do that. Okay, we all can do the mixing and mastering, or say from a writing point of view, we can all do the editing, but you're more good at that, so you do that. It's good to have it on the
Yeah.
table. Not saying, I'm going to do it all and everything, and this is going to be a great product in the end. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. If you
Hmm.
really want to make a good product for the market and really want to get your story out there and make a difference, you need a good team,
Yeah.
autonomy. And now everyone needs to do their own part, and let's come together and put it down. And it's so important in this day and age, and even moving forward, to build an exponential career as an artist in this day and age, you need that network. You can't do it all yourself, especially you. I mean, being
Oh yeah.
independently published, you know, which is proud. It's a proud moment. You don't need a publisher. It starts and ends with you and Steve. And it's so powerful. So powerful. Yeah, there's a
Hmm.
lot more work that needs to go into it. A lot more networking that needs to go into it. You need to get your publicists like you did. You need to
Yep.
get on podcasts. You need to, wherever you can get an interview to promote your work, you need to do those things. There's not going to be someone there who already has that network and they're going to say, okay, no,
Hmm.
you just need to shop there, shop there. It starts and ends with you, which means full creative control.
Yeah.
If you want to go on a book tour here, you can go. No one is going to stop me. Steve approve.
Hmm.
Yeah, approve. You go. So
Yeah.
that's the benefits. Both has advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
So you've also done a kiddies book as well that I know of.
Yes, yes. This was a so it's a children's book slash historical fiction, actually, because it was a story that was told to me about a hidden child of the Holocaust, and
Yeah.
which was a difficult topic, but it was a way that was a story that was told by a rabbi who's a friend of mine, about a girl who was kept hidden, so that she could stay safe, and she went into a convent, so that the nuns could take care of her during the time of the Holocaust. So that was just a powerful project to work on, and I was fortunate enough to have a illustrator who was the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor, and she illustrated the
Right.
book, and that was extremely powerful. So, and again, the messages are, let's take care of each other despite our differences. Let's be there for each
Yes.
other, and let's try to get through the tough times together and support each other. So that was a powerful project and something I didn't even know I was going to realize I was going to be writing, but I just had to do something with that story because history can disappear on us, and we can lose this or forget this happened, or as the generations getting older, we don't see many survivors. I had to get that out there. It was essential for me to get that message out there.
Yeah. When you mention, not liking history in school, when you're talking about the Holocaust, that was our topic in school,
Yeah.
history, Holocaust, Hitler, World War II. Before that, I mean, at that time in school, I didn't know better. I didn't know about World War One or,
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam
Mm-hmm.
Wars. That
Yeah.
you only learn afterwards, and that's because you just decide for yourself, okay, I want to know more than that.
Yes.
What led to World War II, It was because of World War One.
Yeah.
Right? That's where we should
Mm-hmm.
have started. What were the disputes going on there, you don't learn about those things, all you learn
Yeah.
about, okay, this guy called Hitler, and
Yeah.
he went on a worldwide mission, and then you heard about that part, but you don't hear about all as well, you have to like take that initiative, if you want to know about the
Mm-hmm.
history, you know. So
Yeah.
Pat, I mean, is there anything else that you can conclude that you want to conclude with regards to your book? I know you are all about, you're an advocate about compassion and inclusion, it's there, it's at heart.
Mm-hmm.
So is there any like message, you want to push out to the world, while you're here on this podcast, with regards to that message of yours that's coming from there? I know it's linked to your book, when I get your book out there. What message you want to push out to the world with all of that, just combined?
I think respect the past. Remember, it did happen. We have lessons that we can continue to learn. It doesn't die. History doesn't die with us. We can bring it back to life by reading it, by respecting it, by talking to our older generations that we do have, and doing and studying more, finding the resources to do this, to look at information. It's valuable, valuable knowledge. I think that I wish I had taken advantage of it more when I was younger, and bring it forward, live it. It is alive, and the way I try to work is by bringing it back to life with these stories, and hopefully younger generations will keep telling these stories, and let
Yeah,
us have this pass on to younger generations.
I
That's what
agree
I
with
think
you.
is important.
Yeah, 100%. That's how we're going to get, more unity and compassion in the world. The
Mhm.
same colleague from Canada I mentioned before, we had a telephonic chat a few hours ago, and then we were talking about, just briefly discussing, what's happening in Africa at the moment in regards to politics, and he wanted my views on certain things. And he said, me now focusing, on South African politics, he asked me, okay, do you see this as like, something new that's happening, a completely different political mandate that's happening? And I told him, okay, if you ask the average person on the road that, they'll probably see it as something new that is happening, but they're giving you that answer based on no facts. They haven't looked at history. We don't know, is history politically repeating itself? Because that's what I want to know. How do I know what's happening in a certain country now? Now we'll focus
Yeah,
on Africa. When I need to go back first, to see maybe this
yeah,
current leader is repeating something that has happened, 50 years ago. I don't know that yet. And it could be just that what his mandate is, he's slightly like reverse engineered, you know. And
hmm,
what I see in a political party in South Africa at the moment is just slightly reverse engineered, and that's the ideology. So
mm.
history can repeat itself, but we need to be aware of what happened, you know,
Yes,
in
yes,
order to see that.
yeah.
We
And
can't just,
oh, no, I was just going to say that we talked at the beginning about the insomnia. When I can't sleep, you know what I listen to? History podcasts.
yeah, yeah,
And it brings me back to, oh, this happened at that. Oh, wow, that is actually what I actually, and I'm learning so much from that.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that, and unfortunately, because it interests me so much and never did in the past, it makes me not sleep at all. It keeps the insomnia alive, but that's okay because I'm learning something.
Yeah.
I'm resting
You're
and
learning
learning something.
something. Yeah. And I'm sure you must also love to watch, like, documentaries and so on,
Oh,
from back in
absolutely.
the day. Yeah, as
Yeah,
long as it's credible,
absolutely.
the main thing is that it's credible,
Yeah, that exactly,
content.
exactly. You want to do the research on that too. Um,
Not someone who thinks they know about history.
yeah, yeah.
You know, that's the confusion, that I see. I mean, I'm a millennial and I see it with my own generation as well. Before you make a statement about anything in the world, whether it be religion, whether it be culture, whether it be politics, do your research first, before you make an opinion. Don't make that opinion based on emotion because, oh no, I'm following that guy or I'm following that organization because they said so. You know,
Mhm.
they said so, so they
Yeah,
must be right.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that's true. And I think especially we can say that with the younger generations too, of how do we, I don't know how to quite get there in educating our younger generations. I just hope that teachers just continue to teach how to do the research and find the facts, find
Yeah.
the truth.
Well, you know what? You had the answer right there. Podcasts. Okay.
Yeah.
Pat goes at night when she can't fall asleep, she's listening to podcasts. There's so much value in podcasts in 2025, for organic, real information. Honestly, I don't depend, or I can't depend right now, on the educational system or teachers, to get the job done. But, you have educated me, you know. So I'm a millennial now, I'm podcasting. So now I got to take what Pat has, told me. She's wised me up about what's happened, in the 1950s, or her book, you know, has wised me up. So I need to take that now and I need to do my best to try to educate the newer generation, you know.
Hmm. Yeah,
That
exactly.
that's how yeah, that's how it goes.
Keep the thread
That's how
going.
it goes. Yeah, keep it going.
Yeah.
Pat, it has been a pleasure chatting with you. Once again, thank you for the history lesson. Where can people find you online? Where you
You
hanging
can
around?
find me on my website, which is just patblackgould.com. No hyphen, just patblackgould.com. Or my books are on Amazon. You can search me there,
Yeah.
or any places where you can purchase books online. They're available there as well. I'm on Instagram under my name, on Facebook, LinkedIn, so a couple of different places.
Nice.
Stop
I'll
by and say
definitely give
hi.
yeah, definitely give you a follow and I'll share, your links within the description. Yeah, just do what I do. Whenever I come across someone new, I just, take their name, type it in Google, and I see what pops up, and then I just work with relevant information. Simple, no,
Oh,
no,
same
no,
here.
no,
Yeah. Yes.
yeah,
It's been a
no,
pleasure. I appreciate so
it's
much.
a
And you
bit
gave me a
pleasure.
lot of
And do you
input.
have any other projects, in the pipeline for the future?
I may be continuing to look and take another character story and move it more into the later 1970s and do some follow up of life back then, and explore the continued women's movement, explore even more the veterans. The other option being the playwright side of me, I was able to turn my children's book into a stage production using dance and music. There may be something with all the broken angels of taking a section of it and looking at if we can turn it into a play as well. We can see about those options. But there's always something that's going to be happening. We're going to see what it is. So I'm just exploring ideas.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the beauty of being a creative, any form of
You
creative.
can't
You
stop.
always want to keep, yeah, exactly.
I love it.
You can't stop, you just want to keep creating and innovating
Yeah.
and let's do this, and let's try this, you know.
Hmm.
And sometimes it can be seen as a disease, to a lot of creators out there. The thing is, we see why it becomes a disease is because we start something, not everyone, we start something, but then we don't finish it. Oh no, because I want to start this and I want to start this and I want to start that. My message to creators out there is okay, first you need to ask yourself whether am I passionate about starting this firstly, and does it complement my career and my life?
Yep.
And then
Yep.
take it from there. Okay,
Yes.
Ted, thank you so much. Please enjoy the rest of your day
You
and all the
too.
best. All the best moving
Thank you.
forward.
It
Keep
was
doing what you
absolute pleasure.
do.
Thank
It
you.
was. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye bye now.